It's like you're being given the answers ahead of time.
Yeah, I just didn't know what the questions were. You know,
No, for sure.
that's the thing. I think I didn't know that I was asking questions. I was being given answers to questions I wasn't asking.
Mm,
And I think that's kind of why I think this story is interesting, because it's like these are the questions that are now being asked about the nature of our reality and how it's created, how we control it, how it responds to us,
yeah.
what its actual inherent nature is, which does appear to be, you to do with numbers and mathematics and
Freya, that is knowing a lot of the story that's yet to come that we're working on through all these episodes. That is a very, very common theme of the whole story, that you have been given answers, but so you're searching for the question rather than searching for the answer. You're searching for the question
yeah,
that
yeah,
answer has provided.
exactly. And
Mm,
I'm only now in the last few years realizing, because the question is being asked, what is the nature of reality? What is consciousness? What is the evolution of consciousness? How is reality being created? Those were not questions I was asking. I was asking, how do I stop the pain? That's why I've said before, I've always seen my sickness and my illness as a guru. The pain was definitely a guru. It was the only guru for me. It was the teacher. It was the leader. It was the
yeah.
path. It was the revealer of truth. Because I wasn't looking for anything, and I was in a lot of stillness and a lot of silence and a lot of time alone. And I think those are really fundamental. They've always been considered to be, the necessary aspects of a spiritual life, and there's a reason for that.
Here we are again, episode 5 we're on now. The last time we discussed your trip to Snowdonia, didn't we? And then also your whole episode regarding lights in the sky and blinding light during the course of meditation. That's all in episode 4. But now we're on to episode 5. So what are we going to be discussing this time, Fair?
So last episode we were talking about, I hadn't moved to Snowdonia fully then. I'd found a cottage in the woods and discovered that David Nash, the sculptor who I'd written to, who lived in Blind Festiniog, lived very close by. I'd only gone to this place because I'd already had the card for it on my fridge for a long time, a couple of years even. But again, there was a synchronicity that he just happened to be living around the corner, pretty much. And I had gone to see him, and he'd asked me if I wanted to work as his assistant. Now, at that time, I was still living in Bath, still had a house in Bath. But I decided that was such an incredible opportunity to work with him, that I was going to move up to Snowdonia to live there. And so the house went on the market back in Bath, and for a short time, I stayed in his apartment. He had an apartment for guests and other visiting artists and whatever near his studio. So I stayed in there, and so this whole program now, this whole episode is going to be about an artist called John Cage. And I first encountered John Cage when I first moved into David's apartment, and he had all of these prints on the wall, abstract prints of shapes and colors. And I became really, really fascinated by them. I absolutely loved them, you know. And I started asking him about who they were, who they were by, and he told me that they were prints by John Cage. Now, the only John Cage was an American artist who worked also with sound, and he worked a lot with the concept of synchronicity, specifically through the Chinese divination tool called the Ching. And so I'd only ever heard of John Cage in relation to his conceptual artwork, which was, I think, I can't remember the name of it, but it's something like 4.5 minutes of silence. Now this is 4.5, it's a recorded 4.5 minutes of silence. And when it's actually played, it's actually played by an entire orchestra. Now it sounds absolutely insane.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my head around that one.
Yeah, it sounds insane and stupid and kind of nonsensical, but and on the surface level it is. It's all of those things. Like all of this is on the surface insane and nonsensical and crazy. But it's also very, in some ways, very serious. You know, what John Cage and artists like him were doing was exploring reality from a different perspective. And art for them was a vehicle, like sculpture had become for me. It wasn't about the thing. It wasn't about the creation of things. It was about, where do you go when you step outside of, you know, logical, rational, reason, facts obsessed society that we live in the West, and you kind of allow yourself to dive deeper into what's below. And so for him, these things were not meant for everybody. You know, most people would dismiss that as absolute rubbish and nonsense and money for old rope and, you know, the emperor's new clothes, you know. But what I was beginning to understand was that there was something deeper. And so the fact that I'd become very interested in his images, his prints, and I hadn't known he was a printmaker. In fact, he wasn't really a printmaker. He was somebody who used all sorts of different vehicles of art. But I bought a book by him, and it was the same prints that were on the wall in the cottage, in the apartment. And one day I was lying in the bath just looking at these images. And the way that he had made these images was explained in the book. And what he had done is he had gone to a printmaking studio where they had expert printmakers. And his role in the whole experience was to, just as he left his apartment, randomly grab a few items, piece of string and, you know, buttons or whatever, and took them with him, and then used the I Ching in order to determine where these objects were to be placed on the plate. And then the printmakers would literally print them. They would make marks of those objects. And he did this a number of times to create a series of artworks. And that was what was on the wall in the apartment. How he did that, I don't know particularly. It wasn't really explained, but that the I Ching did come into it. And what he was looking at was, if we allow synchronicity, allow coincidence to play a part in making art, if we kind of collaborate with that, if you like, if we have the intention to make a piece of art, but we don't try and completely control it based on what we think is good or what we think is right or beautiful or whatever, does something else come into play? You know, does something else happen? And I would say, right from the offset, that whatever it was that he was looking for to come into play had already come into play for me, because I was so interested and affected by these pieces of art. So much so that I'd bought this book, and I found myself lying in the bath looking at these pictures, and I turned over the page, and suddenly, and this will sound completely crazy, I could hear the image.
Right.
And it wasn't music in the normal way. It wasn't like I was just hearing sounds and hearing a piece of music that I remembered, that it recalled into my memory. It was an abstract image, and everywhere I looked on the page created a different sound. I was hearing the visual stimuli somehow. And I'd never encountered anything like this before. And it was exquisitely beautiful as well. And I'd never heard of anything like this happening before, and
No.
or experienced it before. And it was one of the most magical moments of my life, actually. And then I turned over the page, and it didn't happen on the next page. And when I turned back, it stopped. And I now know that that is a thing. There is a thing called synesthesia. Synesthesia. I don't know. Synesthesia, I think it is, where for some reason our one sense can take the place of picking up stimuli from another sense. So, for example, you might see sounds, and again, this is partly what this whole journey is about the senses, and about how our senses have become, very dull and very contracted and very limited. And that many ancient societies believe that we have many senses, and that they've all just shut down as we've experienced this fall in consciousness. And in some ways you could say, well, this was the beginning or part of an ongoing opening up of those senses, that part of the spiritual awakening is really the awakening of our senses again, that we become much more sensitive to information in a much more nuanced way, that there is information in our field of experience which we are normally just completely oblivious to, because our senses just can't pick it up. Although we're perfectly aware that our dog or our cat or whatever that's sitting in the room with us is watching something in the room, that we can't see, or is listening to something that we can't hear, because they have much more sensitive hearing and sight than we do, and they see in a completely different way. And probably
my dog does that every evening.
yeah
He does. He just looks into space like watching something.
And the more you try, and interestingly, I think that technology now is beginning to pick those things up. Whatever it is they're looking at, we're beginning to see them now through technology, not through our own senses, but through the kind of super digital senses that we've created with technology. So so I decided after that I was going to again, I was on a journey as an artist, as a sculptor, that was not about any particular medium. I wasn't, as I said in the last chat, I wasn't trying to become an artist. I was using art as a vehicle. It had opened up for me at the Brancusi exhibition, and I just thought, okay, get on that train. It's going somewhere, And then when John Cage came along, and the I Ching, and again, would I have gone any further with it? Would I have been any more interested in it if I hadn't had that moment of synesthesia? Probably not. It was again, it's like through this whole journey, there's a radar that's just scanning, and it will blip, and then it will blip, and it will blip. And I always say, if I get three bleeps on the radar, I'm moving towards that thing, whatever it is. That's the way my journey has worked.
That's a good gauge, actually. Is that something you'd recommend for people to be more alert in their own lives?
Yeah, because it's almost like, consciousness is trying to get your attention.
Yes.
And that super consciousness, if you like, something greater is trying to get your attention. And if you see something, in this example, the first one was the fact that I was already interested in synchronicity. Point one was I was very attracted to the prints. I was very, very interested in the prints. Point 2 was learning that it was John Cage, who I already was aware of, but not as an artist. And I was a printmaker making art in that way. So that was number 2. And number 3, which was the really big blip, was hearing his artwork, his visual artwork. So at that point I thought, okay, well, I'm going to see what this is all about. And so there were 2 points that he was mostly interested in, which was the I Ching, which is for anyone that doesn't know it, it's a very, very, possibly the most ancient divination tool on the planet. You know, we have like tarot cards and can't think of any others at the moment, but the I Ching breaks everything down into 64 what are called hexagrams. And these hexagrams are discovered through throwing coins. You throw 3 coins, and however the coins fall, heads or tails, basically, it will create a line, either a straight line or a broken line. And you build up a hexagram with 6 lines from the bottom with 6 throws of these 3 dice. Whilst you're doing that, you have a question in mind. And each of these 64 hexagrams has an understanding behind it, a description of what that hexagram represents at this place in time. And so you read that, and then you see if that how that relates to your current question and your current reality in your life. And it's been used literally for thousands of years in China, began in China. And it's supposedly one of the most accurate divination tools that exist.
Yeah, it's hugely revered, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
And the Chinese emperors would use it to make many decisions, if not all decisions, significant decisions.
And it's the source of feng shui as well, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. So basically what the I Ching can be described as is a way of looking at the information field in any where it happens to be in relation to your consciousness at this moment in time. And again, this goes back to the idea that there is a mathematical pattern, because that's the principle, the underlying principle of the I Ching is that there is a mathematical construct invisible to us in every aspect of our life, in every moment of our life, and in the whole of the construct of reality, that there is a pattern there. And what you're looking at is, how is the pattern intersecting at this moment in time? That's really what the hexagram is showing you. Your interaction with that matrix of information and mathematical perfection is putting you in a particular place and time in your reality, which is unseen to you because you don't have access to that information, and the I Ching gives you information to that, access to that information.
That's the best explanation of I Ching I've heard.
That's the only one I've ever given.
No, I know. I'm not sure we've had a huge conversation about I Ching, but
I've never.
It's very clear. Made that very understandable. Really good.
I've never given an explanation of the I Ching to anybody ever. So this is interesting. Part of the reason for me for wanting to have these conversations is that, as I've said before, I can access this story, but I haven't accessed this story in any kind of linear way. Even when I was writing it, as it was happening, the last bit was always kind of forgotten as I was writing the next bit. So going back into this story is very interesting for me, because I'm making connections that I haven't made before as well.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things about you, Freya, is, and you put it down to this experience, I know, that you are able to just draw the words. You don't even know what you're going to say, do you? Not a lot of the time, not as in when you go and buy your groceries. I don't know what I'm in here for. although that does happen to me fairly often. But you do have this, the perfect words just seem to come through you, don't they?
Well, this is,
Well,
I
they
mean,
do.
this is part of the experience. And,
Exactly.
we did kind of gloss over this in the earlier conversation. I didn't bring it out,
Yeah.
but one of the things that started to happen to me very early on was that I started to speak without any sense of what I was going to say, or any understanding of what I was saying.
Mm.
But but way back, I remember going to visit a woman when I was doing this Let scheme, when I was just getting back on my feet after I'd been trapped in the house for so long. And I went along to do a little bit of help, give her a little bit of help around the house. Middle-aged woman living in a nice flat in Bath. And we had a lovely time, had a cup of tea, a little bit of chat. And I think I was helping her with some decorating in the house. And as I was leaving, I was like, I've got to say something to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, and this conversation's going on in my mind. Well, what? What have you got to say to her?
Mm.
And as I was almost out the door, and this feeling was so powerful, overwhelming, that I had to speak to her. And I just opened my mouth and I said, you don't need to be scared. And she just looked at me and she just burst into tears.
Oh, wow.
And I said, you're completely safe. That's the kind of message that I have for you. You're completely safe. You need to know that. And she then proceeded to tell me how she'd become increasingly terrified over the last year. She'd got really anxious. She was barely going out. She'd started to put locks on her windows. She had rarely let anybody into her apartment. And I had no reason to say any of that. She'd not given me any clues to that whilst I was there.
Mm.
And yet this just came out. And I think that's, again, this is, if we're talking about where this is going towards gnosis, which is where you just know something and you don't even know you know it until you speak.
Yeah.
This is the truth that's being revealed through us, not to us, if you like, from external sources. It's just coming up from inside of us. So, yeah. So it is interesting. I hadn't necessarily made the connection that the I Ching really is a tool which is founded on the mathematical perfection of our reality. And if there is a mathematical perfection to our reality, of course there should be some mechanism by which that can be accessed.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that should be accessed by all of us all the time, but we don't have the sense to do that anymore. So that's what we're getting back to. We're getting back to gnosis, which is just knowing. We don't need then divination tools. We don't need to be taught. We don't need to learn from the internet or from books. We don't need to have other people that we go to give us insight. We have the insight. And that's part of what I'm trying to share with people, is that this is my story of how this happened to me, but this is for everybody. This is for everybody to get to this point of absolute knowing with certainty. What is right for them, what is right in this moment, what is the right action to take, what is the right thing to say without thinking about it, just allowing it.
But also taking actions on those notions, because it's so you can easily just bat that off as being like, not bat off what you're saying, but when you do get a sense of insight or intuition or just a hunch, often people can just bat it off as if like, oh, that doesn't fit with my logical day, whereas actually acting on it is important, I assume.
I mean, I think in some ways I was lucky. I was lucky in that the experiences I had were so profound,
yes,
and so shocking, and so it elicited such emotional reaction from
it couldn't be ignored, really.
It couldn't be ignored. So, and then once I'd taken the decision to leave my job, I was then in so much pain that ordinary life was stripped away from me. And I do think that is one of the biggest hurdles, if not the biggest hurdle, is ordinary life. And it's not necessarily a hurdle in itself, but it creates a lot of noise. You know, there's a lot of noise, a lot of thinking, a lot of what have I got to do today? What have I got to do to survive? What do I have to do at work? All of that takes up a lot of space. And for me, it was almost as if I was kind of thrown into a virtual monastery by being in so much pain. So I was in an altered state. I was completely isolated. I couldn't really communicate with anybody because I was so in so much pain and dealing with so much pain. So yeah, and then once I'd made that commitment that I knew whatever that thing was, and for me that thing was whatever Brancusi had created with shape and form, whatever he had learned that affected me. I was not looking for a spiritual, I wasn't looking for enlightenment. I wasn't looking for a spiritual awakening. I was looking to understand what had that man learnt as an artist that had impacted me so powerfully. Just turned out that ended up being the spiritual path, but that wasn't what it set out to be. So yeah.
Okay, so we were talking about the I Ching. So
yeah,
how
so,
did?
Yeah, so I decided that I was going to just. I was making sculpture at the time. I was also making films and all sorts of things. And I decided that I was going to follow kind of John Cage's path or his practice. And and one of the things that he would also use is dice. So he'd use dice and roll the dice, and the dice would have already be assigned with different meaning. And so you'd roll the dice and see what you got. So I decided what I was going to do was kind of contain my possibilities. With art, because you can do anything and use anything, sometimes it can be really constructive to just shut down the possibilities. So I decided I was going to get a little piece of card and I was going to cut a window in that card, the size that was determined by the dice, and then I was going to make art inside that. So I did that, and I ended up with this very long, thin kind of letterbox shape window to work within. And I started making drawings, very simple drawings inside that. And I started putting them together, and I started writing words. So some of them were text works, and some of them were drawings. And some of them were saying things like, for example, what goes up must come down. Pride goes before a fall. And the objects that I was drawing were little towers. And a few days later, after I had done that, I was standing in David Nash's sitting room watching the Twin Towers fall on 9/11.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and you know, it was very, very clear that I had drawn the Twin Towers, and I had tuned in somehow to, you know, the zeitgeist of consciousness and what was happening at that time. And it's very interesting. There are measures of consciousness. I can't really describe them here, but there are measures, and there was a huge blip on these measures in the collective consciousness just before 9/11. It was almost as if everybody had a sense that it was coming. Everybody had a sense that something was going to happen. I just happened to have, at that moment, dived in to the idea of being shown something of significance, and that's really what that divination process is designed to do. I didn't realize, of course, that's what I was doing, but it was absolutely. I'd never drawn anything like that, said anything like that, focused in any way on that, and the fact that I'd even put them together in pairs, you know.
Yeah.
I had drawn the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you when that happened? Because obviously you must have linked it immediately.
Yeah, I did.
And what was, how did that sit with you?
I don't know. Again, I think it was one of those things that the experience of watching the Twin Towers fall was so overwhelming that I think it kind of blew everything else out of the water. You know, it was like, yeah, there was that synchronicity, but there was like, wow, it looks like the world is going to end. It looks like, you know, the world is at war. You know, that's the way it was being presented in the media. And also my partner was away, and I think in London, and there was a fear that London was going to be attacked as well. So I don't think I thought about it that much at that time. But again, this is one of the things, one of the clues, one of the ways in which this underlying mathematical perfection or pattern that is creating this reality was being revealed to me.
It's like you're being given the answers ahead of time.
Yeah, I just didn't know what the questions were.
No,
you know, that's the thing. I think I didn't know that I was asking questions. I was being given answers to questions I wasn't asking. And I think that's kind of why I think this story is interesting, because it's like, these are the questions that are now being asked about the nature of our reality and how it's created, how we control it, how it responds to us, what its actual inherent nature is, which does appear to be, you know, to do with numbers and mathematics. And
you know, Freya, that is, knowing a lot of the story that's yet to come, that we're working on through all these episodes, that is a very, very common theme of the whole story, that you have been given answers, but so you're searching for the question rather than searching for the answer. You're searching for the question that answer has provided.
Exactly. And I'm only now, in the last few years, realizing, because the question is being asked, what is the nature of reality? What is consciousness? What is the evolution of consciousness? You know, how is reality being created? Those were not questions I was asking. I was asking, how do I stop the pain? I was asking, you know, what did Brancusi know that I don't know? I was asking, what happens if I throw some dice and what sort of artwork will I make if I do that? What will come out of that? Didn't occur to me that I was, as you say, being given answers to questions that I wasn't aware I was asking. But it's the question. It's the only question. You know, if there is what is the purpose of any spiritual path or any spiritual realization if it's not to see the nature of the true nature of reality? That's what this is all about. It's having the true nature of reality revealed in bite-sized chunks in such profound ways that you cannot forget these moments. I couldn't forget these moments.
No.
So they are all seared into my awareness. And as they began to happen, you know, one happens here, one happens here, one happens here, one happens here. As they begin to do, I eventually began to see that there was geometry in the experiences themselves. You know, that they were creating patterns of connection in themselves, which is the nature of reality. That is the nature of reality underneath. And interestingly, you know, I don't know if we talked about it last time or the previous time, about me having dreams of the Mayan culture. Now, this was pre-2000. So we were still preoccupied with the millennium bug back then. Interestingly, again, the idea that you know, the whole of civilization was going to come to a crashing halt because somebody had forgotten that we would eventually go past the year 2000 and all the computer clocks hadn't been programmed. That was the thought anyway.
Yeah.
We weren't thinking about what came after that, which was the Mayan calendar, the end of the Mayan calendar, which became the next fear-based.
Was that 2012 or
2012? Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, when I started having these experiences around the I Ching and 9/11, I wasn't aware of the Mayan calendar then.
Mm.
I'd had dreams of being in the Mayan civilization, and I had synchronicities and the experience of the man coming from the dream that asked me to go to Mexico, and I did go to Mexico. But the Mayan calendar, this does all link in. So there was a man called Terence McKenna who died a few years ago, and Terence McKenna was a really fascinating explorer of consciousness. He did a lot with psychedelics and understanding what is the nature of reality beyond the mundane level, and he was very, very fascinated by the I Ching as well. And before all of the interest in the Mayan long count calendar, which was supposed to end in 2012, did end in 2012, came up, he had started researching the I Ching and how he believed it was the building blocks of reality. And he produced a computer program called Time Wave Zero. And Time Wave Zero was based on the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, basically being equivalent, if you like, to the periodic table of elements, which make up so the periodic table of elements makes up the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the elements that create the physical world when in combination. And he believed that the hexagrams of the I Ching were the elements of the unmanifest world, or the etheric world, the world from which the physical world is manifest. And that's why accessing it could give you an insight into the future, or into what was going on in your consciousness at that time, or in your reality at that time. And he made this computer program it was very rudimentary at the time, because computers weren't very advanced. I think this may have been in the late 90s, early 2000s. And he ran this program to see what was going to happen in the future. And what he discovered was that this computer program ended. It just stopped in 2012. Before he'd ever heard of the Mayan long count calendar. By another avenue, through using the I Ching, he also discovered that something very profound happened, or was due to happen, in 2012. And my experience now, my belief now, is that something fundamental did happen in 2012, and we're now all beginning to experience the result of that it was the end of reality as we had known it, not the end of physical reality, not some huge destruction or anything like that as it was portrayed in the movies, but something happened in consciousness in 2012. Something very profound happened.
A shift.
A massive shift in consciousness, a massive awakening of consciousness, and a move away from the linear concept of time, as has happened to me, away from duality, and into and people moving much deeper into the true nature of reality beyond the surface level, as the senses begin to open up again. Yeah, so the important thing is that for this story is that in using even a rudimentary version of a divination tool, as I did, using the dice, just throwing the dice, with the intention of letting go of my control over the output of that artwork.
Yeah.
That something else, some greater insight was achieved into 9/11, the Twin Towers falling, this major event in human consciousness, a major event in time. And in a way, that's an analogy for my whole story, for my whole journey. So when you were saying earlier about, people have busy lives and how do they access that? I accessed all of this by relinquishing control. That's really what it is. I stopped trying to control everything, and in a way I had to stop trying to control everything, because I was dealing with so much pain and illness, and that does tend to kind of take the ambition away, and the the kind of plans for holidays away, and what you're going to do at Christmas away. You don't think that far ahead anymore. You're just dealing with the day that you're in, the moment that you're in, the pain that you're in, the predicament that you're in. And I think that that's why I've said before, I've always seen my sickness and my illness as a guru. The pain was definitely a guru. It was the only guru for me. It was the teacher, it was the leader, it was the path. It was the revealer of truth. It gave me insight,
freeing up the space to receive.
And to receive and to hear and to listen and to notice those blips on the radar, which most people are having all the time, and they're just too busy. There's too much noise to hear those blips on the radar. And I think the more we quieten our lives, if I could give any suggestion as to how to access that deeper reality, it would be to dedicate a certain amount of time to silence, to just give up, to create space for something, like Simone Weil said, just waiting without expectation.
Yes.
And that was the other thing. I had no expectation, because I wasn't looking for anything. I think the more you're looking for something, the more it tends to, just be outside your grasp. Because I wasn't looking for anything, and I was in a lot of stillness and a lot of silence and a lot of time alone. And I think those are really fundamental. They've always been considered to be, the necessary aspects of a spiritual life, and there's a reason for that. Just so that you can hear, you can listen. So that was my encounter with John Cage and the I Ching and the 9/11 synchronicity. So in the next conversation, we're going to be talking more about earth energies and how I discovered that earth energies, that there is energy lines in the earth which can cause us to be sick and can really profoundly affect our lives, and how I learned how to clear those. And that began a new trajectory for me of working with information and energy and clearing it. And that brought about my own healing, and is really the foundation of what I do now. So that's the next one.
Freya, thank you so much again. We will reconvene very soon, but in the meantime, you have a great day.
Thanks a lot, Izzy. Bye.
Bye-bye.